I've been really questioning like what does the future look like, and I've increasingly wanted to just take a back seat in the Bitcoin space, and more just kind of be behind the scenes in the Bitcoin space as opposed to the front facing. It's a hard decision. It's tough.
What are you working on, or what do you want to work on that you feel like provides you the most meaning in this stage of your life?
One thing I've noticed is throughout my teens into my 20s, I was very goal oriented. And ultimately, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for setting those goals. I think that when we try to like set goals around what it is that we want to do, what the outcome of a certain project needs to be, we miss all of the other potential opportunities that could have existed, or the things that it could have morphed into because we're trying to confine it to a box.
Welcome back, everybody, to Hosting Bitcoin. This is where we explore not just the infrastructure behind our money, but the inner transformation that comes from understanding it. And today, our guest is someone who doesn't just study Bitcoin as a system, but also as a mirror for us as human beings. Seb Bunney is a friend, he's a writer, he's a thinker, and he's an author who explores the intersection of Bitcoin, psychology, and human behavior. His work goes far beyond just the charts and the cycles, and he asks deeper questions about meaning, values, and what happens to us when we truly begin to understand the systems that we're living inside. Because Bitcoin isn't something that just changes how we store value, it also changes how we see it, and in many ways, how we see ourselves. Today is a little bit less of an interview and more of just a conversation between friends about meaning, about presence, and the subtle but sometimes uncomfortable ways that Bitcoin reshapes how we show up in our lives. And I also want to say that there are some points in this conversation where, honestly, Seb and I just have to pause for a bit, because these topics aren't just for us to say words for the sake of filling space on a podcast, but really it was about creating a space of honest inquiry for ourselves in real time to share with you all. So this is a little bit more vulnerable than some of the conversations that have come before, and I hope the depth of how connected we are to this conversation and how much the subject matter means to each of us comes through in the recording. And with that, I hope you enjoy. Seb, I am so looking forward to this, and it is an honor to have you on the show. Thanks for spending some time with me.
Oh man, Beau, honestly, I'm super excited. For those that don't know, like Beau and I met last year, kind of in September, in kind of an in-person little Bitcoin event, and I was just like blown away, not only by the event, being in person, being in the mountains, doing amazing things in person, but also just by the conversations with you, Beau, and just like your groundedness and just how you show up. And so I really enjoyed the conversations. Glad we got to hang out just a month or so ago, and looking forward to this conversation.
Man, I totally echo that. You have a very unique way of showing up in the world. I think it's part of why we gravitate toward each other. I think it's also a reflection of where we met and the places that we've connected, that those are sort of more intentional spaces and don't fit the typical conference vibe, more imbued with meaning. And I think that's really what we want to spend some time noodling on today, is how is everything that we're doing in this world of reinventing money connected to meaning? So I'd love to just pass it over to you for a little bit. Maybe a little bit of like personal context would be helpful, of sort of when did you really start thinking about things like the meaning of life, and what was your thread of connecting that into your Bitcoin journey, just to set the context a little bit so people know what we're talking about, why we're talking about it at all.
Totally. And, maybe I'll start with a bit of a tangent and just say, you just mentioned that like kind of we're magnetized or drawn towards one another. And I think that in this world that is very digital, there's so much stimulus, it's really easy to become very disconnected. And when we actually like tap into the body, it never ceases to amaze me how the body has so much information to give us. And so like, I'm sure people listening to this, like when you're walking down the street, you notice like when you're in conversation with someone, whether or not you're drawn to someone or whether you're not drawn to someone. And the way that I kind of tend to think about it is like, if you drop like two little stones into a pond of water, they're going to create ripples. And as those ripples converge with one another, sometimes you're going to get people where their ripple kind of amplifies your ripple. And then sometimes you're going to get people where their ripple kind of negates your ripple. And you notice that feeling. You notice it like viscerally. And so I would say that not only is it the first time we started chatting, I was like, wow, I really kind of like resonate with this individual. I feel like we kind of like amplify one another's kind of like energy we're putting out into the world. But I would also say that when I first stumbled across Bitcoin, I also noticed that same sensation, that I was like, wow, there's something here. There's something that feels like it amplifies my energy, and I'm curious. I want to dive into this. And so maybe to now go back to your question and answer your question, I would say that, so I started out as a like backcountry mountain bike instructor. I loved teaching mountain biking. I live a few hours north of you in Canada, and I absolutely love teaching mountain biking. But I realized pretty early on that I was just like, when I'm earning $15 an hour, there is no way that I'm going to be able to support a family. There's no way I'm going to be able to really get by. And so I started to be curious. How do I create passive income streams? So that led me down the rabbit hole of real estate. And then when I was in real estate, I was like, oh man, I want something a little more exciting, something quicker. And so I did real estate along with the financial markets. And I noticed that I was looking at the world through the lens that we're in this free market, this kind of like capitalist free market. And then anytime I'd take a position, the amount of times the position went completely against me when this company was creating so much value. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm so unsure about how the world really works. And so as I started to dig in, I realized there was a lot of manipulation and a lot of kind of games being played on a financial level. And that led me to gold and then eventually to Bitcoin. And I would say with Bitcoin, it really just opened my eyes. It's almost like that key that unlocks the interconnectedness of everything. And I just realized how I kind of put it into terms like everything is downstream of money. That when our money is broken, we're going to see these repercussions kind of reverberate throughout society, whether it is going to be elevated asset prices, whether it's going to be an impact on the parent-child bond because parents having to work more because they're not able to kind of put food on the table to the extent they might like to be able to, or whether it is consumerism because our money is worth less and it's incentivizing us to spend as opposed to save. And so ultimately, I think everything is downstream of money, and Bitcoin, I believe, is one potential way to kind of reconnect as humans and kind of change some of our trajectories.
I totally resonate with what you're saying because, I spent early years kind of like playing around in financial markets, and, Christine and I were full-time real estate investors for many years. And it was more of, and I talk about this a lot in our content and interviews, there's this sort of logical, like, real estate not going to make sense into the future, been a great investment in the past, people have to update their mental models and that whole track. But there's a whole side of it that's just based more on personal meaning. And the sense of, even though we were doing something that was working financially, we had a successful business and it was doing everything it was meant to do, that there was this lack of personal fulfillment of really assigning like a true purpose to what we were doing outside of just navigating the economic world. And I feel like that's emblematic of a lot of people's experience is like, I'm doing something, it seems to be working on the surface, but something inside of me is calling me to more. And we were talking last night about libertarianism. And I pulled up a really short video to just like go over the concept of libertarianism. And the funny phrase that was in that video is like, I'm going to paraphrase, this is a nice idea for a way that we could all cooperate with each other, but there is no country in the world that operates in a truly libertarian way. And that reminded me of Bitcoin in a way, because I thought, in a sense, Bitcoin is like this unification of great ideas around assigning meaning and cooperation with each other. That's just like the first time that it's actually worked. Like this set of ideals has been in the collective consciousness for a long time. And for whatever reason, we've never found the mix of qualities and design characteristics to actually make it work in the real world. And I don't know if you would agree with this. I'd love your take. But that to me is part of what gives it such this sense of like almost spiritual excitement that finally something is working that is aligned with these high ideals that we've set out, that we've never found a vehicle that really delivers on that promise.
Oh man, that's such an interesting take. And I think that the way you describe it, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that, how would I describe this? I would say that you're always going to get people that are able to overcome the environment to which they're in and go on to kind of do great things. You look at like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, like these people that have kind of gone outside of the realm at which they live in and gone on to kind of be great individuals. And when you look at these individuals, or when you look at maybe, let's say, the average individual, what is the difference? And I think it is that just unfortunately, the majority of people, we are a product of our environment, and it's really hard to escape our environment. And so when I look at Bitcoin, what I think it does is it realigns a lot of the incentives to give people the capacity to start looking inwards. And I think that in this world where we have got so many things vying for our attention, whether it is just social media and just kind of the rise of the technological age, or whether or not it is decay in purchasing power, meaning we're having to work more, creating all of these financial pressures, which by the time we get home, most people just want to sit, chill, watch Netflix, and they don't want to kind of look inwards. I think when you have this vehicle that has not only the potential to expand in purchasing power over time, but I think that it also instills certain moral characteristics of kind of like cooperation and honesty and integrity and such. I think that for me, what it's done is it's made me reflect so much more about like, who am I and what do I really want to contribute into this world? Mm-hmm. And what does value really mean to me? And so I think that, again, like going back to kind of the start of what I was trying to say, is that we live in a world where unfortunately people are a product of their environment. And I think Bitcoin, in a sense, is changing the environment to realign the incentives towards introspection and contemplation and thinking about who we are and how we show up. And I think that's profound in a world where more and more of our attention is being captured by social media and broken money and such, and people aren't necessarily aware of how they're showing up. They're simply just in survival mode.
Why do you think that it aligns people more toward introspection? Do you think that that's a characteristic of Bitcoin itself, or what do you think pulls people toward that behavior that's different than the other environment that we're coming out of?
I think maybe there's a couple things. I think on the face of it, you're going to get Bitcoin as a tool for change. We're seeing from, let's say, like the Human Rights Foundation and Alex Gladstein and the work he's doing in a lot of these countries where Bitcoin is helping those that are really in like oppressive regimes and stuff. And to be honest, I find that inspiring when you're just like, this tool has so much potential for change, which then it makes you reflect on the self and be like, how do I want to create change? Who am I and what is the best version of myself in order to be able to move throughout this world? And I think that that's more of people that are very curious about the self. Maybe that's a more common thread. However, I also think that for the average individual, I think that when you have this vehicle that potentially increases in purchasing power over time, you've got this incentive to save over spend. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if you've got this incentive to save over spend and your purchasing power is increasing over time, then I think we start to see this incentive towards low time preference thinking. And so when people start thinking more long term, they think about the bigger picture, they start thinking about, instead of just consuming right now and filling some immediate impulse, if I save and this purchasing power increases, what is it? Where would I want to direct that energy in order to garner satisfaction? Is it towards family holidays? Is it towards buying a house? Is it towards better quality food? Whatever that may be, I think people start to think a little deeper each time. Whereas at the moment, we have the opposite incentive, which is that as purchasing power is decreasing as opposed to increasing, our purchasing power is greatest in the present moment. So if our purchasing power is greatest in the present moment, we're incentivized to spend over save. And so I think that we've got this very consumptious, heavy society. Or if you're not consuming, you're just constantly thinking about, how do I protect my purchasing power? And so a lot of our brain capacity goes towards thinking about financial systems, investing, and such. And so it's taken away from that introspection. And so the moment we have a vehicle which preserves purchasing power, or at least we have confidence that it will preserve purchasing power into the future, you've always got volatility in the short term, you can take off all of that processing power off your mind. You don't have to think about, where am I going to direct my capital? You're able to just focus on, okay, what is important to me? Where do I want to direct my energy as opposed to my capital and such? So I find that interesting, but I'm curious to hear your perspective.
I'd agree with you. And it's, I think, underappreciated specifically by people that aren't as deep into this space, how much your whole cognitive wiring changes when you change that one thing of, do I need to go out and take risks and speculate to preserve my energy or multiply my energy, versus can I just find the right vehicle that stores it appropriately and even multiplies it over time and acts as a great energy storage vehicle. And the impact of that psychologically on people, on the way they behave, on their mood, on the way that they show up in the world, it seems like such a simple, subtle change, but it really ripples through every bit of behavior that you have. Just like, um, money rarely goes examined by most people. They rarely examine how it impacts their behavior. I mean, it really is sort of the unexamined influence that, if given a little bit more attention and intention, completely changes how you navigate the world. And I come back to this, what most people have heard over and over throughout their lives, is money is the root of all evil. And through a certain lens of, really badly designed money, that could be true. And I've found that the deeper that I've gotten into the Bitcoin space, the more I've developed kind of the opposite. Is like, the appropriate use of the appropriate form of money is in a way like the seed of salvation for people. And it's been this distortion over a long enough period of time that we just accepted that that's how the world is. But the re-examining of that belief with a new schema, a new way of interacting with that thing that we've become familiar with as a concept, it's very underappreciated how far-reaching the impacts of that are. And we're still so early in it too. I mean, we're a tiny subset of people who have any exposure to this new thing, and an even tinier subset of people who have really started to adopt looking at it through this lens, and thinking through what the implications might be. And I don't think it's that big of a subset of people in the world that it takes to move consciousness along in that direction, but we're still so early in that understanding and that rewriting of beliefs with this.
Oh man, I could not agree more. And there's kind of two things that kind of come to mind as you're speaking. The first one was, I remember listening to a talk by Steve Jobs, and a lot of people have probably heard some talks, or at least some of his kind of wisdom shared. And one of the things he talks about is how he always used to wear the exact same turtleneck shirt and the same pants every single day. Yeah. And the reason why was because we only have so much willpower, capacity to make decisions every single day. And he doesn't want to waste that on, what am I going to wear when he first wakes up? And so the way that I kind of analogize this to Bitcoin is, it's just, when we have money that is broken, we are spending so much of our willpower, our capacity, in the survival mode of, one, where am I going to get money from to be able to put food on the table and a roof over our heads? And two, how am I going to protect what money I do have? And that consumes so much of our energy that could otherwise go towards bigger questions. How do I want to support my family? Who am I and what are my values? And so I think that that's where, kind of going back to your point, if we have more capacity, I think that it can truly change in a profound way how we show up. And so this is where money is like impacting us psychologically. And the other point that I kind of wanted to make, and I make this in my book, The Hidden Cost of Money, which is, like language, I see, there we go. You were prepared. Like language, I see money as like a medium of expression. And because you were kind of talking about this idea that money is the root of all evil. And in reality, money is just a tool. Language is a tool. A knife is a tool. You can use these things to harm others. You can stab someone with a knife. You can also use it to chop up your food and use it productively. You can use language in a way that's aggressive. You can use it productively. And so I see I see Bitcoin like language as a medium of expression, and it's how we express to the world what it is that we value. And so when you walk into a grocery store and you see someone buying grass-fed meat and organic vegetables, and then you see someone else buying cigarettes and microwave meals, you can tell a lot by the way they direct their capital as to what they value in life. And I think that the challenge is, we don't think about how that tool can be distorted or censored. And so when we think about money, you've got like regulations that say what you can and can't do with that money. You can buy certain things, you can't buy other things. You've got things like capital controls. If you live in China and you want to protect your family and preserve your purchasing power, so you think, you know what, I'm going to invest overseas because I'm noticing the Chinese yuan's not doing too well. China doesn't allow that. So all of a sudden, your ability to protect your purchasing power, support your family, is being impacted by capital controls. And then you've got things like inflation, which are, the way I think about inflation is if Bitcoin, or if money is a medium of expression, it's how we express to the world what we value, inflation is taking away your ability to be able to express yourself. It's limiting your ability to express yourself. So if you want to kind of feed your children good quality food, but you can only afford poor quality food, you're impacting their life force. Money is so much more than just this medium of exchange. It dictates how we move through this world, how we express ourselves, and how we express to the world what it is that we value. And so when we have these rules in place, these regulations in place, these capital controls in place, you're altering the flow of capital throughout society. That makes it very hard for us as individuals to determine what it is that society truly values.
Why do you think, and do you think that we're warranted to do so? Why do you think people assign I'll say some people, because some people aren't here yet. Some people assign such a hefty, almost religious meaning to Bitcoin specifically. Like, what do you think calls that out of people? And do you think that that is healthy or warranted?
That's a fascinating question. So I would say we can look at this from a couple different perspectives. First off, if you ever look at there's a study that recently came out that looked at the Myers-Briggs. This was maybe a year ago. Mm-hmm. The Myers-Briggs 16 personalities, and then kind of compared it to what is a general population spread, what is Bitcoin spread. And what you noticed is that there's a lot of individuals that I think have struggled to find community in day-to-day life simply because they're willing to question, they're willing to have conversations that can be hard, that can be heavy. And it's not about putting someone else down. It's actually about, I want to grow as an individual, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. And if you've spent this much time in Bitcoin and you come to a different conclusion, how did you get to that conclusion? And so I think that Bitcoin brings people together who are curious, and it does create a bit of like a cult-like following. And so I think that people, when they look in on that, sometimes they're just like, what is going on? What is it? What is this like cohesive thread that kind of underpins Bitcoin?
I mean, I've attached a lot of personal meaning to this space that, looking from the outside in, would seem crazy to people who aren't exposed to it. And, you know, especially as someone who's trying to build a bridge for the people that are not yet exposed, that's an interesting spot to walk, because you can very quickly alienate yourself from anybody else being able to hear you, who you're actually trying to reach. But it is still a very important idea. And so, I mean, spaces like this are almost sort of like permission to think through it and really like, what do we think about this? And
100%.
I heard a quote recently: if you're not changing your opinion on things about every 18 months, you're probably not evolving fast enough, because you have new information, you're a new person, new things are happening. Like, there's no, even though this is recorded and gets distributed, like, nobody's holding you to be the same person that you were on that appearance, especially in a world that evolves so quickly.
No, I couldn't agree more. Okay, take 2 on that question. No, take 3 on that question.
How are the vibes in the cult? And are they good?
I would say that when we actually like take a step back and ask what is religion, I would say that in many ways it's like a moral framework from which to move throughout this world. And I think there's a lot of people that step into religions and deeply think about them, and they're not doing it for others. And there's others that step into religion for community and not necessarily the moral framework. And so when I think about Bitcoin, I think about Bitcoin actually very similarly. I think that Bitcoin in many ways carries a moral framework from how to move throughout this world. And I think that Bitcoin is about like honesty, and I think Bitcoin is about integrity, and I think Bitcoin brings people together in many ways that are deep thinkers. And again, with that, I think you've got a lot of people that have very different views on the world, but Bitcoin is like a unifying force, this kind of moral framework from which they all agree at like a base level how to move throughout this world. And at the same time, I also think because of that, people find that appealing and they're in Bitcoin for community. And so I think the difference, you can usually identify the difference between those two individuals by how they show up when they're questioned. And I think that when you question an individual who has thought incredibly deeply about Bitcoin, why he's in Bitcoin, what does Bitcoin mean to him, he is willing to interrogate his beliefs and usually respond with curiosity. Whereas I find when someone is simply in Bitcoin for the community aspect, you'll find that the moment something attacks Bitcoin, they go on the defense, on the aggressive. And it's not that they're actually trying to protect Bitcoin, it's that they're actually just trying to protect their community, a community that in many ways they may have never found before. And so I find that really interesting. But I think that Bitcoin absolutely from an external sense can look like a religion, given that many people are following a similar framework on how to move throughout life, even though they can have different views on many other subjects. I'm curious, like, how do you tend to think about it, would you say?
I think that's an accurate framing. If you boil it down to its component parts, and please nobody get offended for me oversimplifying this, but like it's a community. It's a community of people who are coming together for a shared purpose. There's a shared set of beliefs or norms that kind of go with it. And there's a sense of sort of thought leadership from a lot of individuals, right? If you're thinking about it in the context of a church, there's a pastor or priest, and they aren't, the leader of the whole movement, but they are a representative sort of leading the discourse. If you think of, God, I even hate this analogy, but like a podcaster is a priest, or, people who are sort of like moving thought forward, shepherding the ability for people to come along for the ride. And so there's a lot of very similar dynamics, I feel like. And if you're talking about something as central to how we navigate life as money, love it or hate it, it's very deeply embedded in how we all coordinate and sort of like makes up our social fabric. It's not crazy that we would assign so much meaning to it. I mean, there's things that matter much less that have just as much cult following. I mean, some video games get this sort of like just rabid fan base that will move mountains in service of their mission. And so I think we're totally justified in having this feeling about this thing, especially knowing, we haven't really covered it in this, but anybody who's listened to your work previously, or really anybody's work in the Bitcoin space, like it's a very deep set of knock-on effects that happen from people adopting this individually and at scale. And so when you're connected to the impacts that can happen from, the proliferation of this thing, I don't think it's unreasonable for it to get the sense of religious fervor behind it. And the real question is, do you use it in a way that personally improves your life, your outcomes, and the way you show up for other people? And if you're using that litmus test, I feel like you're operating with the right framework to make good decisions and not get too far off base. Like I would ask you, like, do you feel like being a part of this community and sort of aligning with the movement of what this technology is has impacted the way that you show up in the world personally for the positive?
Oh man, I think Bitcoin has like profoundly changed me. Like, and when I say profoundly changed me, maybe I should state it from this perspective that I think something comes in and changes who you are at a deeper level, and sometimes some things come into your life and they help you uncover who you really are. And I think that Bitcoin hasn't necessarily changed who I am at a core level, because I recognize that even pre-Bitcoin, I walked throughout this world with a certain set of like kind of moral beliefs, but I'd never found anything that had kind of aligned or resonated with me. And when I found Bitcoin, all of a sudden, it kind of gave me a bit of like a North Star that I felt like I really resonated with. And it's interesting. Last night, my girlfriend and I, we sat down and we watched this Netflix documentary called something, it's Louis Theroux and the Manosphere, something along the Manosphere. It's all about like toxic masculinity, essentially, on Netflix. And what I realized is, man, it was looking at a subset of these kind of the deemed like toxic masculinity. These guys are just like, it's just gym. It is making money. It is doing whatever it takes to make money. People buy OnlyFans girls, even though they're just like, OnlyFans is disgusting, but I'm going to make money off it either way. And it seems like there's no moral grounding. It's just like, I will go to whatever means necessary to be seen and to make money. And in my mind, when I think about Bitcoin and when I think about this life that I have walked, I feel like when money is breaking down, people are optimizing for survival. And so I think that people's values are kind of being shrouded in this kind of optimization.
Well, this is actually, I think this is a perfect mirror for what we're talking about too, because it's almost like before Bitcoin, many people didn't have the awareness or the tools for awareness to be able to think that way about the way that they show up in life and what they're putting their energy toward. And it's almost like because we are given this very cool tool that you have a different level of responsibility of the way that you use it, talk about it, discuss it, and it requires you to actually step back and not just earn for earning's sake, but really to think about, okay, where am I really putting my energy? I mean, this goes back to both of our stories of sort of doing what we were doing before we were in this space. And it's like, yeah, everything is working. I'm not, like I'm not just filling space with meaninglessness, but it's not as aligned as it could be. And I know that. I know in my core that I could be doing better. Just like Jeff talks about putting your energy in one system versus another system. It's like as you're unlearning how you've navigated the world previously and reorienting to something totally different, that takes an immense amount of energy to just make that shift or even start to be aware that that shift is a possibility. It's like there's so much habit energy stored in the way that we think, our belief systems, the way that we navigate the world, that it's almost, I mean, it's terrifying for most people to think that there is this whole other way of navigating the world. And what have I been doing all this time and investing in how I show up? So, like, this sort of struggle to really articulate yourself, the struggle to say what you want to say is almost emblematic of how important and energy intensive it is to reorient to a different future. It's part of why people get so defensive about their beliefs. Is like there's a inherent resistance to how much energy it will take them to believe anything different. I mean, I'm sure you'd resonate with this if you've done any, meditation or like psychological work. Like even if you want to change your beliefs, it takes a whole hell of a lot of work and intention to do so. Now imagine if someone's just telling you, hey, there's this new thing and it's going to require you to rewrite your beliefs, and you had no intention or desire to do that before it was shoved at you. There's going to be resistance naturally.
Oh man, totally. And, I remember reading years ago this idea that you can think of the way we look at the world as a spectrum between judgment and curiosity. And you can't be in both places at the same time. You can only be in one of them. And when we look at the world through the lens of judgment, we're looking at the world through the lens of how we think the world works. When we're looking at the world through the lens of curiosity, we're trying to determine how the world works. And I think that what is really fascinating is that in many ways, I think Bitcoin has sent me on this path where I'm really trying to look at the world from a place of curiosity as opposed to this place of judgment in this world that's increasingly trying to say, are you left or are you right? Are you black or are you white? Are you freaking labor or are you conservative? Are you what? You know what I mean? Like it's trying to force you into these camps. And evolutionarily, we have come from a place where we're all about conserving energy, and being curious is energy intensive. And so it's easier for us. I think we've developed this tendency to paint things as black and white or have rules of thumb because it's so much easier for us to navigate the world with that perspective as opposed to being curious. Curious is just, it's so energy intensive, like moving through this world, trying to see things for what they are. You know what I mean?
I don't think most people recognize how recent of a phenomenon it is for us as people to have an energy surplus in what we do. Like for almost all of human history up until like a few hundred years ago, like we were just barely scraping by. And there was no like buffer, there's no, stores of energy for, I mean, like a famine wipes out a population up until a few hundred years ago. And that's just a product of, okay, like our energy source, our caloric source got contaminated, and we can't use it. So we have an energy deficit, and that directly contributes to like losing lives. And so this idea that we could take energy in caloric form, and for those that don't know, your brain is like 20% of all the energy you consume, whether you're thinking really deeply or just sitting there. Like taking the energy to re-examine beliefs is not a luxury that people have had for very long. And so it is a legitimate threat to survival biologically to try and allocate that energy unless there's a very clear and present need for you to reorient.
No, I think that's such an interesting way of looking at it. And yeah, like the analogy that kind of comes up is like, man, if you're a kid and the first time you experience the dog comes of night, tries to maul you, it's so easy for the brain to just be like, dogs are evil. I never want dogs. And in doing so, every time you see a dog, you're going to run the other way. You're going to potentially lose the incredible benefits, the incredible experiences of having a dog, walking alongside a dog, the experiences that come with basically just being able to move throughout this world with
paragliding with your dog.
Paragliding with your dog. And so I think that it's fascinating how it's just like, again, like you can just make a split-second decision just to run away from every dog you ever see, and you miss out on so much opportunity. And I think the same is true for also every other aspect of life. Like we can make a very broad stroke, brush stroke on how we think the world works. And yeah, it may help us move throughout this world, but you're not going to see things clearly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It maps to like, there's so much more meaning in life, I feel like, when you embrace this sense of curiosity about it versus the alternative. And even so, like we said, it takes an additional amount of energy. It takes more awareness. And so even if it's more satisfying, I think of like my journey through Bitcoin, and sort of one of these things I talk about is this quality of laziness that I identified with for a lot of my young life. And as much as I like to be efficient with my effort, I no longer describe myself in that way. And it took work to undo that belief, that way of seeing myself. It also takes a lot of work to show up and do the proof of work to mine on the network. And, that took so many different types of energy, psychological, like additional motivation, literal electrons, capital, like all these forms of energy to reorient and decide to go pursue something that was more meaningful. Totally worth it. But that like activation barrier is way too high for most people. I mean, just think of how most people go through life. It usually takes some form of crisis or highly painful experience for you to determine that you need to change your strategy. Otherwise, very few people, store up the energy required to make an intentional, positively motivated pivot. Like it's usually a very different set of motivators for people to decide, all right, I'm going to gather up the energy of activation to make this change because now I see that there's a clear and present need for it. If there's no trigger, if there's no situation or catalyst, why?
When you think about your upbringing, teenage years, do you think you've always been someone who has been able to piece together ideas and think about the potential future? Like, what do you think set you up in your upbringing for understanding Bitcoin and being curious?
Have you ever felt like you've done everything right, built the business, made smart investments, and yet there's still one piece missing? If you're someone who believes in Bitcoin but hasn't yet explored mining, let me introduce you to something that most people never even realize exists, and that is fully managed Bitcoin mining with Abundant Minds. We help high net worth individuals like you own industrial grade mining infrastructure without ever touching the machines. It's hands-free, professionally hosted, and designed to generate passive income by turning electricity into Bitcoin every single day. It's tax advantaged, it's asset backed, and for many of our clients, it's become one of the smartest moves that they've ever made in their investing career. So if you're ready to take the next step into real Bitcoin ownership, not just holding, but producing it at a discount, visit abundantminds.com. That's abundantminds.com and see why this strategy is changing the game for serious investors.
I think it's half of what you just described, which is sort of like a positive future outlook and a ability to connect the dots into the future. But the other side of it is just upbringing background. So my parents and grandparents were like pretty heavy gold bugs. So the installation of the software for Hard Money Matters was in me from a pretty young age. So that was enough wiring to be receptive to something like Bitcoin, which shares, a lot of the characteristics and the reasons why people like gold, people like Bitcoin. Just Bitcoin does it a little bit better, or a lot better in some cases. And so there is that familiarity of being able to recognize this is similar to what I already know. But also, I love it when people describe like gold is the sound money for people that think everything's going to shit, and Bitcoin is the sound money for people that are optimistic. And I'm very much on the optimistic side. And so I resonated much more with, this is a system that aligns with the future that I want to live in, not just the future that we're heading towards. And I mean, exactly what you said, like if you spend enough time with learning about this technology, it's hard not to connect the dots of what happens in the future outcome. I've said a lot to people that are close to me. It's pretty easy to see where things are going. It's pretty hard to see the path that it will take to get there, and what time frame and what winding series of events it'll take. But the end state, pretty reasonably confident in that.
It's when I was chatting to my buddy recently in the last couple of, well, actually in the last week, we were just discussing this idea that just like, what happens if Bitcoin fails? And what I find really fascinating is that ultimately, like when I actually just reflect on it, I think Bitcoin has kind of brought together such an interesting group of individuals. And it's also just highlighted, if anything, like human potential, because I definitely noticed that in the way that I kind of like move throughout this world, work in the outdoor industry, even in kind of the like investment space that I did work in, I found it really hard to find curious individuals. I find it really rare to meet curious individuals.
Were you thinking like, just because this was what I was thinking was, even if Bitcoin is gone tomorrow, all of those people are still incredible thinkers and would be the community I would want to be a part of.
Oh, 100%. And I think that it's just become very apparent to me. I've kind of set a rule. I've got a few rules in my life. And one of them is that I don't want to let money dictate my ability to spend time with people that I care about. And so like even going and seeing Jeff last weekend, Jeff was like, hey, I'm going to be in Silver Star. Silver Star's 7 hours from me. And I drove out there and back for one day. And it's just like, I'll go and do that. And if one of my good friends down in the States, I'll fly to Nashville if it means that I can spend a weekend with someone that I like deeply care about. You know what I mean? And I think that it's just rare to meet these incredible individuals, and even more so that you resonate, you can drop into these conversations. And so that's where, I don't know, that's one of the rules that really has profoundly shaped my life, is just don't let money be an inhibitor to being able to like grow as a human and spend time in great conversation.
How do you think about that? Because this is a, frequent thing in the Bitcoin space, is like that resistance to spending any dry powder or capital resources to have experiences, because your opportunity cost is the Bitcoin that you didn't buy or the Bitcoin that you didn't hold. But there's this whole side of life that you miss out on, like you were saying, if you don't take the time and use the resources to connect with people and pursue. Like how do you think about balancing, I'm going to optimize for growing my wealth in this asset that I've chosen as my vehicle, and I'm going to have the most meaningful life all along the way? Or are those competing choices?
I think that there is a balance, but I think the most important thing that I've found to get clear on is, I'd say in my early 20s I read a book, and I think it was called Your Number, and what it was essentially like, work backwards and figure out what is it that you actually want to see in your life. Like, what is it that you want to do? How many trips do you want to take a year? What kind of food do you want to eat? How many times do you want to eat out each week? What kind of house do you want to live in? Do you want to rent? Do you want to own the house? Like, what does that lifestyle look like? And you can put a dollar value to that number. And once you actually determine what that number is, now you've got something to kind of target towards. And I think that the way that I look at it is, we can just grow our monetary base, we can just grow our net worth indefinitely, but is it really increasing satisfaction in life? And is it really adding value to life? And I think it goes back to what we're talking about at the start, like meaning. Like, is it really kind of fulfilling us on a deeper level? And I think that when I actually just think about, like, what is it that I want out of life, I don't need to be flying around in a jet. I don't need to be like a 1,000 property real estate portfolio with kind of another 500 Bitcoin on the side. Like, that, to me, that doesn't feel like it resonates with me on a deeper level. And that's not, there's zero judgment there. Like, I think anybody can target towards whatever it feels like resonates with them. But to me, I actually live quite a simple lifestyle. Like, I really enjoy being in the mountains, and I really enjoy spending time with people I care about. And in an ideal world, I'd love to own a little property with land to be more self-sovereign and to raise a family on that land. And that is not far-fetched. And because of that, I think that when I think about the Bitcoin that I hold right now, if Bitcoin goes anywhere close to where I think it's going to go, I'm going to be totally fine as an individual. You know what I mean? And because of that, I'm not putting every single dollar and I do put every single dollar and cent into Bitcoin, but I'm not intentionally just like limiting my ability to show up now by saying I'll be happy in the future. Like, I want to be able to experience life at the same time. And so I think it's like, there is finding a balance, because if I started right now from zero, I would be optimizing for putting dollars into Bitcoin. But I think that it's about understanding what it is that we want from life and actually putting a dollar value to that, so that we can understand when we've reached that or are close to that, and then re-optimizing for presence.
So how would you tell someone to go through this process for themselves? Like what would be the framework to think through what you actually need so that you can optimize your life for meaning, rather than just going after this goalpost that doesn't actually matter to you?
I would say the first thing, it is really getting clear on what it is that, at least in this moment, you feel like you're drawn towards. And the other thing that I should say, and this is kind of a little contradictory, is that nothing is fixed in stone. Like, at the moment, I'm optimizing for a life that I think is what like I'm targeting towards, but that has changed so many times. And it's always changing. And so it's not that this optimization for, or this targeting, this kind of charting a course, is not fixed. So I think that the most important thing is just getting clear on, like, what is it that actually creates meaning in life. There was an interesting individual that I spoke to a few years back. Actually, I was on a trip with Dan Martell, and we were, prior to this, just talking about Dan Martell. And anyway, I was on a trip with Dan Martell and a couple others, and one of his friends who owns a toy distribution company. He would distribute like Action Man and Barbie and all of this all over North America. And he was writing this book at the time. And one of the chapters was on this idea that we tend to have a society that optimizes for the 3 Ps, which are prestige, power, and possessions. We're looking for prestige. How do we have the job that people are going to look up to? Power. How do we have the job where we can really make a difference? We can make change in this world and govern others. And then finally, possessions. Like, how do we have the Lamborghini? How do we have the Rolex watch? How do we have the things? And when we actually just stop and ask ourselves, like, what are 2 or 3 of my most favorite moments throughout my life? they're usually never prestige, power, and possessions. They're nearly always the 3 C's, which is connections, contributions, and challenges. So it's when we're connecting with others, we're building relationships, we're building a family. It's when we're challenging ourselves. It's when we are trying to be the best version of ourselves, whether that is in our career, whether it is in our sports, whether it is in the values we try to kind of show up and uphold. And it's when we're contributing, when we're kind of giving back to our community, giving back to others, helping others along their journey. And so I think that when we actually just stop and reorient and think like, what does, like in this moment, what is a rough idea of a lifestyle that I feel like would be deeply satisfying and deeply rewarding? That lifestyle would be one where, for me, I can like raise a family, I can spend time in the mountains, I can challenge myself in the physical form through sports and being in nature. I can feel connected to nature. I can feel connected to my community. I feel as if I'm going to have time and space to be able to reflect on how I move throughout this world and then share those things in content, books, podcasts, conferences, things like that. And so if I was to put a dollar value to that style of lifestyle, it's not a very expensive lifestyle. And so I think that once I'm then able to put a dollar value to that, you can work backwards and determine if I'm projecting Bitcoin to be what price, you can then work out how much Bitcoin you need and what kind of time frame you think it will be until you get there. And I think up until that point where you may be able to afford such a lifestyle, at least with any other income, you can use that income to optimize for community or spending time traveling to be with the people that you really care about or spending time in nature and those other areas. And so I just think it's about the most important thing is getting clear, because otherwise I think we're chasing something that we actually don't really know what we're chasing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally resonate with the way you that framework, by the way, the P's and the C's, that's very memorable and a great way to just contextualize how you're making decisions. But the piggyback off of that is I feel like, especially because we have meetings with people on our team a lot and we ask them about their goals and we want to kind of do whatever we can to support the people who are working with us to build the life that they really want to have. What I've found is, one, there's a lack of clarity of what it actually takes to live the life that I want to live. That's a very common theme, is that I've never actually like taken time to think about what does ideal look like for me. And if they do, and they've thought about it, most of the times people actually overestimate what they need to have a essentially a dream life. Like I've gone through this exercise a few times, and what you realize is like it's actually hard past a certain extent to find things to spend money on that meaningfully improve your quality of life past a certain point. And that number is different for everybody of what the passive income from your asset value needs to be for you to have total freedom and essentially total optionality in your life. But it's lower than most people think. Like, just to calibrate, I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs want to get to 9 figures or $1 billion and are surprised to recognize that everything that they really want in life is like an order of magnitude lower on the scale. And so you can actually sort of like lower your expectations of yourself and still create exactly the outcome that you want. And to what you were pointing out, like it's totally acceptable to get part of the way down the journey of a certain goal and realize that it's no longer satisfying to go toward it, or that you've evolved as a person and what you originally wanted is not the same thing. And I'm fortunate to have thought of this before launching out in my career, but I think a lot of people unfortunately don't realize that the model for how they were judging their success in life, it doesn't get re-examined until they're 20 years into a career that they've just been sort of like grinning and bearing. And so the process, the enjoyment of the process matters so much. Like if I think in terms of our business, we could bring in people who just absolutely crush results and, deliver unbelievable KPIs and OKRs and would make doing what we're doing so much less fulfilling and satisfying. And that's not actually a win. You could achieve your original goal and hate the process all the way and be a total loser. I think Tony Robbins' way of describing this is success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure, right? You can get very far down the road of a goal that you set as a different person, honestly, and realize that you've been wasting the time that you have with the people you have around you who really just want your time and attention. They don't care how many zeros are sitting in an account somewhere past a certain point of safety. And that's a very sad realization, to realize that you've missed out on time and life and joy with people in favor of, some arbitrary number on a screen that you're aiming toward.
There's a famous quote, what is it? The unexamined life is not worth living. And I think that it just summarizes everything you've said. I think that a lot of individuals, it makes me feel really sad, either they don't have capacity because society is putting so much pressure on them, or they're just kind of like drifting throughout life. And life kind of happens. And it's just like, I think that life is so freaking incredible. And I think that that's where it's like, when we think about like Bitcoin, like that, again, that point you made about gold, the difference between Bitcoiners and kind of like gold bugs, I think is absolutely perfectly well said, where it's like gold bugs are kind of preparing for the worst, while Bitcoiners are kind of like getting ready for an incredible, potentially prosperous future for society. And I've been really questioning like what does the future look like, and I've increasingly wanted to just take a back seat in the Bitcoin space, and more just kind of be behind the scenes in the Bitcoin space as opposed to the front facing. It's a hard decision. It's tough.
What are you working on, or what do you want to work on that you feel like provides you the most meaning in this stage of your life?
In contradiction to everything that we've just said, I think that one thing I've noticed is throughout my teens into my 20s, I was very, very goal oriented. And ultimately, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for setting those goals and kind of optimizing for those goals. However, as I would say, like since the pandemic, I have stepped back from setting kind of these goals, and I still have frameworks and things that I'm passionate about, and I direct my energy towards those things that I'm passionate about. But I try not to actually set goals, and I try to detach or surrender to the outcome of whatever it is that I'm passionate about, simply because I think that when we try to like set goals around what it is that we want to do, what the outcome of a certain project needs to be, we miss all of the other potential opportunities that could have existed, or the things that it could have morphed into, because we're trying to confine it to a box. And so I think the one thing that I've really been conscious of is, so since December, the company I was working for the last 2 years up here in Canada, a Bitcoin company, they're struggling a little bit financially, so they laid off some staff. And it was interesting because I'd actually been asked to be laid off a couple months before. And so it worked in my favor. And I absolutely want to work in the Bitcoin space. And I'm not 100% clear on what that looks like, because I've just done a lot of written beers for Bitcoin, written the hidden cost of money, consulted for companies, a whole bunch of companies from an educational standpoint, learning management systems, built Looking Glass. And at the moment, I feel like that kind of ship has sailed. And I think there is a new ship, but I haven't defined what that ship is yet. And I don't necessarily think that I have to define it. I think that when the right opportunity arises, I will know from an intuitive standpoint that that is the right opportunity. And so at the moment, I've been more kind of just being in the river, allowing the current to take me, and it will flow to wherever kind of the next thing is. And I believe that that will unfold exactly as it is. And so at the moment, I've more just been focusing on connection as opposed to trying to seek something or force something.
There's a lot of people that exist in that kind of space where they are just sort of in a holding pattern for the right thing to come along. And I'd be curious, do you have any sort of like things that you say to yourself, or mental tips or tactics that you use for yourself to sort of allow yourself to wait in that space? Because I find, especially when it's something like your work and your livelihood depends on it, it's often very hard for people to hold out for the thing that's truly right for them, because they just sort of like need something. And of course, having some savings on the side is probably a very helpful thing in navigating that. But I'm just curious, like, how are you talking to yourself through that process to wait for the right opportunity, not just an opportunity?
I've had some interesting experiences throughout my life where I feel like I believe that the world always gives me exactly what it is, what I need at any kind of given moment. And so when nothing is coming through, I believe that it's a time for space. And so when I wrote The Hidden Cost of Money, I did not intend to write a book. I had no kind of desire to write a book at the time. And my dog had actually had like gut issues. And she would wake up every hour for like 2 weeks. And every time when she would wake up needing to go to the bathroom, I would need to go and open the door. But what I noticed is I'd be waking into kind of this liminal space. And there are countless studies that look at this, but that kind of waking, that headspace you're in, just as you're waking, you have way more, if I remember correctly, gamma activity. And Carl Jung and a couple others call it like you can be tapped into kind of the collective unconscious. And so I had a lot of information just coming to me saying, you need to write a book. This is chapter 1. This is chapter 2. This is chapter 3. This is chapter 4. And so I wrote The Hidden Cost of Money, the first draft in a 2-week period between 1 and 5 o'clock in the morning. And so that was the first book. And that was actually the second book. But I've actually just recently, randomly, so I had to drive to the interior this past weekend, and the interior of BC is kind of like 6.5, 7 hours away. And many people over the last few years have asked me, hey Seb, when is there going to be another book? You're going to write another book? And I've not been drawn to it at all. I've not been drawn to writing. I feel as if I want to write when something inspires me to write. I don't want to write just for the sake of writing or to force content and put noise out there. And when I was just about to leave the house to head to the interior the other day, I went upstairs into the garage, and a garbage can had been knocked over in the garage. And on the floor was a copy of Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act. And I don't know if you've read that book. It's a fascinating book.
It's just out of frame on my shelf above me.
It's a phenomenal book. And this is like a tattered version that looks like it's been shot by a gun. It looks like this thing has been destroyed. I have no idea where it came from. Like absolutely no idea. And it's just sat there on the floor. And the moment I touch it, I got the inspiration for my next book. And so I've been pretty busy the last couple of weeks, actually, just managing a whole bunch of things. I haven't had much time to like sit and think. And all of a sudden I had 6.5, 7 hours to think in the car after immediately the name of the book, the subtitle of the book, and the main core thesis of the book kind of came to me. And then so for the next 6, 7 hours, I just had all the chapters just kind of like pop into my mind. And so at the moment, I say that I'm sitting here waiting. In reality, I do have a book idea that I want to kind of start to work on and put my energy towards. And I've kind of got a bunch of the chapters kind of formulated in my mind and in various notes. And now I just got to piece it together. But again, I believe that after having enough experiences through my life, that if I'm not being given anything or nothing is coming to me or inspiring me, that just means that it's right now is a time for space. And right now is a time for pausing, as opposed to trying to force something. And if I do force something, it will feel like it will be lacking in integrity. It will feel inauthentic. And I've noticed that throughout my life. When I've tried to force something, when I've tried to go out there and create something when I haven't felt drawn towards it, one, I can't drop into that flow state. It's very hard to drop into that flow state. And two, it has never really turned into something that has really fulfilled me. But I'm curious, like, how throughout your life would you say you've always kind of had an idea about what the next thing is when you've been in whatever it is that you're doing, or have you had these paused?
No, absolutely not. I love that you said that, because it's almost like even if the next thing was to work on another book, it wasn't ready to come until you gave the space for it to blossom into.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't just set out and say, okay, I have open space, now I'm going to go work on a book. You created space, and then a book came into that space. And that, I feel like, is the pattern, is you have to be willing to sit with the open space first in order for there to be a vessel for that thing to flow into. You know, in the transition from real estate to building this company, for example, like there was probably a good, I'll say the better part of a year of just open space where I was really just sort of learning and considering. I mean, we had moved, we were sort of like transitioning out, we were liquidating properties, but I wasn't like, okay, let's go start a mining company. And for anybody that's heard the journey, you know that it started out with some misadventures before it turned into what it is today. But there was a good, I'm going to say it was pretty much a year where I was reading, I was learning, I was just sort of allowing myself to be with no decision point of what the next thing needed to be. And that openness two big things I was working on in that period. I was diving ever deeper down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and I was spending a lot of time making music. I love drumming. I was, good enough at just general playing other instruments and music production that I would spend whole days just creating music and, reading Bitcoin books in the off hours. And so it was a totally unplanned, not self-orchestrated process that led into this mining and energy angle and really falling down that rabbit hole. But it was only because I had the space to consider a bunch of different things and really just spend time exploring the experience of being a human without needing for the next thing to show up immediately. And if there's one takeaway from that experience and what we've talked about today, it's, if you are feeling a lack of meaning or a lack of direction or purposelessness in your own life, maybe all that's required is a little bit of space, which is something that we, especially in the world of social media and constant connectedness and AI agents that can work 24/7 on whatever you tell them to in the off hours and are always asking for feedback on what they've built. The real commodity is time that isn't burdened by erroneous thought. And for the people that can give themselves that space that most people don't give themselves the privilege of in this world, I think, it's just sort of table stakes in the world of a decade ago, but now it's a very unique thing to be able to have that openness and receptivity, because most people are just being bombarded 24/7 by their devices and don't have the awareness or habits built to shut off from that. And that creates two very divergent paths for the people that go down one way of being or down the other.
I think that's so well put. And there's a book I read a little while back called The Art of Contemplation. And it basically just dives into this. And it's just like, when we think about it, there's so many moments in a day that we can kind of drop into our thought, but instead we immediately reach to the phone. You look at, let's listen to a podcast, we listen to a book, we want to be productive, we want to do this thing, we want to do that thing. We look at social media, and those moments, it's amazing how much insight can come through in those moments. And so I think that being able to be conscious as individuals, when you're sat there in the restaurant and your girlfriend goes and runs to the bathroom, just sit there, just observe. Or when you're like walking down the street, take the headphones out and just kind of like wander and just observe what's around you. And I think it's in those moments where you allow your mind to kind of be this kind of relaxed presence and this kind of relaxed curiosity, that I think that there's so much information being fed to us at every single moment. And at the moment, we're blocking it out with all of these various devices, technologies, this noise and such. And so it's never ceased to amaze me just how many times throughout my life when I have felt a little directionless, that the world has given me exactly what I've needed. I've not needed to redirect or course correct through conscious cognitive thought, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you alluded to it, but there's always information coming toward us, and it's not necessarily coming through this device or this fantastic book or a YouTube video or whatever it may be. I mean, I see this pattern in myself. I'll spend all day, working and doing what we do, and then get up from my computer and almost immediately pull out my phone and look for, what's the video I'm going to watch to learn something. Or, what's the coaching call I'm going to, watch a recording of. And like, the irony is that there's so much information in empty space if you just create the space for it. And just as your experience with, a book literally just like plopping itself down into your reality, sort of unprompted, like that was information that was just sort of asking for the space to be received. And we don't give ourselves enough to be receptive to that. And it's usually far more useful information, even if it comes in a differently structured way, than whatever you're, seeking to pull into your environment through a device or through a book or whatever it may be. Not that those things are bad, but it's sort of this like abundance of information drives this behavior of seemingly needing to absorb it all the time. And it actually leads to a reduced absorption, like less integration, less actual ability to integrate it and put it to good use. And I just think that there is this source of information in our lives that if you get quiet, it's always there. And it's very challenging for many of us to get quiet in today's world, to let it be there and let it come in.
I think that's the theme. We just got to be quiet, spend more time in space.
I want to be respectful of your time. I also want to give you a chance. Is there anything that's come up either in this conversation or recently in your life that you feel like is important to share with people, knowing that you're talking mostly to people who are already in some sense involved in the Bitcoin community? Anything that you've noticed that you want to call attention to and share before we hop off?
Maybe it's just to reiterate, I think, what we've just been discussing. And I think it's just this idea that the world is kind of always giving us information. And sometimes we can just be very distracted and unaware of this information we're being fed. And it never ceases to amaze me just how profound, when we actually just step back, instead of trying to kind of push forward in this kind of active change, we instead just kind of allow this passive change to kind of take fold. It just never ceases to amaze me. And maybe I'll give you a little bit of a story. Like I had to drive down to Vancouver. I live north in kind of the Whistler ski resort area. I had to drive down to Vancouver to get my car fixed. And as my car was being fixed, I just went for a walk throughout Vancouver. And so as I was kind of wandering along, I was just kind of pondering life. And at the time, I was kind of in this relationship that I'd been in for 2 years. And it was a really hard relationship. Like I really cared about her, but I wasn't in love. I felt like she was my best friend. And it was so tough because I was like, on the face of it, she ticked all the boxes. She was such an incredible person. But I just felt deep down that she wasn't my person. She was just a friend. And so anyway, I'm thinking about this and my body knew this, but my cognitive mind was just like, oh, but she ticks all these boxes. Oh, but this and oh, but that. And as I'm walking down the street, I noticed my shoelace was undone. And I look down, I go to squat down to kind of tie the shoelace, and I see a book open on a garbage can to the right of me. And it just flaps open in the wind. And I look over, I'm just like, that's weird. I go and wander over to the garbage can, and it's a book. And the book is called, it was like the Shamanic Guide to Fulfillment. And it was open to my birthday. And in it, it said, listen to your inner knowing. That's your life lesson. Wow. And I just remember just being like, what is this world we live in? Like, this is profound. And so sometimes I think that the world does speak to you very directly, and then sometimes a little more indirectly. But I do think that when we actually just take space to move throughout this world and pause and kind of really focus on presence and awareness, I think there's a lot of information that comes to us that is otherwise we're just completely oblivious to. And I think that it really, really is profound.
That is such a beautiful way to wrap this up. For people that don't know you, and this is their first exposure to you, I would just say Seb is one of the most beautiful thinkers that we have the privilege of getting the chance to see think in public through the things that you work on. I would love for you to point to anything that you're currently working on or anything that is still out there that people can get value from. The most prominent example, of course, would be your book, The Hidden Cost of Money. If anybody hasn't picked it up yet, definitely should. But Seb, where can people keep up with what you're working on and keep up with you as well?
I would say, like, first off, I really, really appreciate the kind words, Beau. Like, it really means the world. And like, as we alluded to at the start, like, notice how people make you feel. And I felt like the first time we ever hung out, I just definitely felt like a resonant energy. And I just really, I cannot thank you for just how you show up and just the value you bring in this space. And so I would say, like, people can find me at my website, sebbunny.com, and Bunny is Bunney. You can find me on Twitter, Seb Bunney. And outside of that, on a bunch of podcasts, I write quite a bit and I enjoy kind of just sharing ideas. But appreciate everyone listening to this and appreciate you having me on, Beau.
Thanks for coming on, Seb. I can't wait to see you again in person, probably in the next couple months. And for all of you who stuck around with us, thanks for your time and thanks for listening. And Seb, till next time, appreciate you coming on to Hosting Bitcoin.